Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Dance Studio Owner Life Coaching. I'm happy to welcome back Caroline from HarQuin Dance Bookkeeping. And today we're going to be talking about what else but our numbers. You've always heard people say, know your numbers, know your numbers. And today we're going to dig into what that actually means. So, welcome back, Caroline. How are you?
I am doing so well. Thank you for having me again. I'm always excited to talk about numbers and helping our studio owners get set up for success. So I'm happy to be here.
So we'll get right into it. One of the things that we talked about before coming up with this episode was KPIs and why they're important to studios. So, can you talk a little bit about what KPIs are and kind of the focus of what you'll be talking about today?
Sure. So I feel like KPIs can be a little bit of a buzzword. Key performance indicators. I think it might sound a little bit elusive. And so it's important to realize that KPIs is not anything new. It's measuring and tracking metrics that help you to see how your studio or your business is really doing. So it's nothing new. It's been around forever. I think that word has just kind of caught some momentum over the last couple of years, but um, specifically for studio owners, getting into your numbers, knowing what things to measure and to track so that you know if you are actually making a profit, what programs are profitable. We've talked about percentage of payroll, all of those things. These are the things, the numbers that are so important for you to measure and track so that you know whether your studio is financially successful.
Right. Now, is there a key number of KPIs? I met somebody at a conference a couple of years ago, and she's like, "Oh, I have KPIs for everything. I got like 19 KPIs here and 15 over here." And she just had so many. Is
Holy
there
smokes.
a target number that we're going for here?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, everybody's different, and I think it can be exciting. I know I get it, it sounds silly, but I do get actually pretty jazzed about this stuff because I don't once you start digging in and you realize, oh my gosh, I can understand these things, it can be kind of fun, but you don't want to overwhelm yourself. 5 to 7 KPIs at a time, and knowing which ones, because there's a lot of them, and you could do everything. But what are the ones that really matter? What are the things that really speak to your studio specifically? Just because other people are measuring something doesn't mean that you have to. So we say 5 to 7 max. Yeah, 19. Holy smokes. Kudos to her for keeping track.
Yeah, I think she was keeping stress, honestly.
Yes.
Um, so when we talk about our enrollment health, that seems to be what everybody's talking about this year. We kind of started the fall feeling like things were behind
Yeah,
the prior season, but some people saw an uptick as the new year came along. So, what are
sure.
some things to look for in terms of tracking your enrollment health and retention rate?
Yeah. So retention rate is a big thing. It's always important to remember that it costs less to keep a student than it does to acquire a new one. So some of the things that you want to look at besides just the amount of students that you have to really understand how healthy your enrollment is how many students do you have that are active versus how many can you have. So that's an important number to know. You may be a small studio, you may feel like you want to have 500 students. Can you have 500? So it's important to know how many you can actually have. And then how many new enrollments do you have versus how many students did not re-register with you or withdrew. So you want to know how many new students you have registered this season. How many are new? And I'm going to give an example because I think this is a number that maybe people don't know how to get to. So um, I'll do an example of, let's say you start the season with 200 students, right? And then you have 50 students that join throughout the year. At the end of your season, let's say you end up with 190 students. So how do you know what your retention rate? And this is something we've discussed before too, benchmarks. So what is the industry average? So the industry average is about a 70 to 75% retention rate is good and healthy. So if you had 190 students at the end of your season, you're going to take that number, you're going to subtract the 50, and don't fall asleep now because I know. Once we start getting into numbers, it's like, well, but so you had 190, you're going to take away the 50 that enrolled during the year, and you're going to divide that by the 200 that you started with. That's the simple formula. And that's going to give you your retention rate, which in this example is 70%. So that tells you how many of the students that you started with stayed with you. So it's
Right.
not just about the 50 that you got. It's about how many you kept. Does that make
Right.
sense?
Yeah. I think it's important to look at, you mentioned the industry benchmark, that if you're at 75%, you're doing well, kind of to help people understand once they calculate their number, then they can kind of pinpoint that as the next thing they're trying to work towards. So, I worked for Girl Scouts for many, many years, and we looked at retention because, as you said, it's so much more work to go out and get new
Yeah.
people, because you have to replace everybody you lost first before you can even start to add.
Hmm.
So I know that in like that kind of arena, they were averaging between like 45 and 72% retention rate year over year. And they were similar to us in that they ran on the school year and things like that. But based on that, knowing wherever you land with your studio numbers, you could do what we did, and that was look at, okay, if our retention is 50%, can we get it up to 50? Can 55? Can we get it to 60? Slowly get up there because it takes a lot of time. Um, and I find that when you're looking at retention, there's so many factors that
Yes.
impact that number.
Yep, that's what I was just going to say.
Yeah.
It really is indicative of, and we say this a lot. When you're dealing with KPIs, KPIs are indicative of behavior. So really, what you're looking at is, okay, if my retention rate is low, what's going on in the studio? Is it I mean, obviously, sometimes there are economic trends, there's outside factors, but it's super important that you can look at your own studio culture, how things are being run, what you're doing to keep kids engaged, or are there things that returning students get that set them apart from new students, all of those things. KPIs really just uncover behavior, and then you can start to figure out what is it that we need to change to make this number what we need it to be.
And actually, episode 116 of this podcast, I talked about how I inadvertently landed in a conversation with a former dance mom and why she left her studio, um, and why she didn't enroll in some other local studio options because of things that were concerns for her as a parent. So I think the good thing about looking at your numbers is your data is just your data.
Yep.
You don't have any emotion attached to it. I mean, maybe you do, but there's no emotion attached to it, but it can help you pinpoint, okay, where's the problem?
Right.
Maybe you don't realize quite what's going on, but if you dig deeper, you can find there's something going on. Maybe it's with a class or a teacher. Maybe it's
Mhm.
how your customer service team interacts with your folks. These are things that would impact that.
Absolutely. Also, having an exit strategy is something that some studio owners don't consider, but it's really important. How people go can sometimes be the deciding factor whether or not they're going to come back, or finding out
Mhm.
why. Sometimes those are questions we don't like to ask because we don't want to know. But it's super helpful because sometimes people will say things like, "We love it, we're happy, but X, Y, and Z." And then there's follow up. You can follow up with them. You put them on, an email blast for, old students or whatever. There's things that you can do to kind of nurture that relationship even after they've gone that can really make a difference.
Yeah. So let's talk about revenue per student next. What should
Yes.
we be thinking about and looking at in this area?
Yeah. So revenue per student is super important. It helps us to see, are our tuition fees, are we priced properly? Do we have certain programs that, we have maybe less students, but we're making more per student? So that gives us information as to whether or not we should be sewing into those programs to try to get more students in those programs. If you have a lot of students paying a little, as opposed to a smaller amount of students who are paying more. Those are things that we want to look at. High enrollment does not necessarily mean high revenue per student. We always say that you want to work smarter and not harder. So I think that coming up with tuition rates can be really challenging. I know we talk about this all the time, that there's such a psychology behind making money when you're running a dance studio, but it's so important that you
Yeah.
understand your numbers and you know what it is that you need to break even. How much does this class need to make? What does each student need to be paying in order for me to be able to, not just turn a revenue, but make a profit and pay myself and all of those things. So that revenue per student is a super important number to know. You should know that number all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think when we look at that number, it's good to do it frequently,
Mhm.
because it will change over the years and you can start to track it. Um, I probably should have mentioned this before we started, but it would be a good idea, like those of you who use like Google Sheets, to just create a KPI dashboard.
Yes.
And you can track year over year that way, so that you can get a sense of, are you doing well? Are you on the track to, turn the corner and be doing better than you were the prior year or 2 years ago? Um, and it kind of helps calm down some of that fear, like,
Mm.
oh, because I raised my price, that's why people left. Well, you don't know
Right,
that without data.
right,
Or undercharging. Like, I've seen people recently, they want to fill a program, and instead of doing more marketing and getting better at sales, they're actually focusing on trying to undercharge.
right,
And, looking at it from this perspective, you get a better idea of what you're actually doing, financially, and that
right,
impact, instead of that
right.
knee jerk reaction.
Right, fear-based pricing, which is a big thing. And also if you're looking at this number often, year to year, or, half season, however you decide that you want to track that metric, a lot of times you'll see, hey, my expenses have increased considerably
Right.
and disproportionately to what I'm charging. And that's why
Yeah.
that's an important number to constantly look at, because if we're making that decision just based on, well, oh, it's been a year, maybe I should up my
Mm.
pricing, or I noticed the studio down the street bumped their pricing, that's really not the way that we want to be making those kinds of decisions.
You know, I have to call out because I saw this in a Facebook group almost 20 years ago, and someone said, "Oh, yeah, just raise your tuition like $2 a month each year." And that was like the going wisdom. And it seemed like hundreds of people just took that advice from one person in a Facebook group. And people were like, "Oh, I
Wow.
just raised my rates $2." And I said, "Well, what's the actual percentage increase? And
Right,
does that actually make sense for you? Are you even
right.
keeping up with inflation?" Um, I had to put that one to bed. I'm like, stop with the $2 increase, just blindly
Yes.
assigning prices.
Right, right. It's so important that you know your own numbers
Yeah,
and that you make financial decisions based on what you need. And that's really, that's all you can do. It's not a collective decision. And
right.
I think, it's great that we rely on our industry for insights, and obviously for benchmarks and things like that. But you are located where you're located. You have a completely different demographic than the studio down the street. You have a different
Yeah,
set. I mean, there's just so many things that, yeah, $2 a student, I mean, maybe that makes sense for somebody, but it might not make sense for you.
back when tuition was $30 a month. Um,
Right? Right?
so I know next you're going to talk about payroll percentage. I know that this is a big one. A lot of people feel like their payroll is just out of control. They've found that the teachers in their market are wanting a higher pay rate, and they're finding that it's more than they can afford to spend. And they're just not really sure how to look at that. So could you talk to us a little bit about payroll percentages,
Yeah,
and what
sure.
benchmark to look at?
Yep, yep. So, I mean, again, this is a benchmark. That it can be different for every studio, but typically 35 to 45%, which is on the higher side, but that is about the percentage of that your payroll is out of what you're bringing in out of your revenue. Now, for some people, that number may be 35, 40%, and it does not include their own pay. And that can be really tricky. I think it is super important when you're sitting down and you're looking at your numbers, and you can speak to this because you have a lot of insight and you've written a book on staffing. So I know this is something that's somewhat in your wheelhouse, but it is really important when you're sitting down and you're dialing in on those numbers that one of the first things that you measure is what can I afford to pay, and you've got to set yourself up with that number
Mhm.
and know that that is first, and then everything else. Some people will, strap themselves into a really hefty rent because they think that the space is the most important part. And, obviously we want to have a great studio with room to grow and all of that stuff. But I have seen some phenomenal studio owners with hundreds of kids in a space that is, does not have 3 rooms, doesn't have 3 bathrooms, doesn't have 2 huge lobbies, and everybody loves it and they're happy to be there. So it's important that we're understanding what numbers matter more. So maybe your space is not quite as big as you'd like it to be, but you can afford that rent, and therefore you can afford that payroll, and you can hire good teachers. And if your output, you're creating really great shows and great dancers, and your atmosphere and your environment is great, then you can build, and then you can move to that larger space if that's something that you want to do. But payroll needs to be something that is considered first and foremost, and it's really important that you as a studio owner are included in that number, because really if you're measuring profit
Yeah.
and you're not paying yourself, then your studio is not as healthy as you think it is.
We
No.
could just do the math for the listeners who are probably driving in their car right now. If, let's say, their studio is at $300,000 a year in revenue,
Yep.
if we're looking at that benchmark, um, 35 to 45% of that revenue. So we're going to take a look at what that would look like at the 35%.
Yep.
When you say total revenue, I just want them to make sure they understand that's literally all your also called gross receipts,
That's it.
all the money that's come in,
That's it. That's not your profit. That's everything
cash,
you're
credit
taking in.
cards,
Yep.
all of that. Okay.
Yep.
So we have the
Yep.
300,000. Okay. So that's 105,000.
$1,000 annually. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that's at the 35%, right? So if your studio's at $300,000, we're looking at 105,000 over the year. So that's 8,750 a month.
Yep.
So that kind of helps you to see where that 35% benchmark would be
Right.
at a $300,000 a year in revenue studio, which is probably a shocking number to some of our listeners.
Right.
So, that again, that number includes your pay as well. When
Hopefully.
your payroll gets up into like the 50, 60, 70%, what starts to happen?
Yeah. I mean, that your payroll at that point is eating your profit. Um, it is, again, it really is about balance and budgeting and really understanding what you should be spending and creating kind of boundaries for that.
Yeah.
And I know so many studio owners who don't operate on a budget, and budgets feel super restrictive to them, and it shouldn't be. One of the things that all of this can do for you is create a supportive foundation for you to be creative. And I think what happens is when you start talking these kind of numbers, kind of taking the joy away from why I do what I do. This part of it is making it so that I'm not enjoying myself and I don't have the freedom to just kind of be creative. No
Yeah.
one's trying to steal your creativity. And it's the opposite. We're trying to set you up so that, or you should be setting yourself up so that you can be free to start making creative decisions because you understand the parameters that need to be there to give you that room to create. If that does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
But having a payroll percentage that's that high
Hmm.
just literally eats your profit.
Yeah. Now, I see like we have a note here of like what a healthy target would be. You mentioned that if you're not paying yourself and you think you have a profit, you may not actually have a profit or probably not doing as well as you think you do if you're
Right.
not including the owner's salary in
Right.
your payroll
In that number.
percentage,
Hmm.
right? What would the healthy target be for your profit margin, knowing that we've already taken into account all the payroll, including the owner?
Everything. So we're talking healthy profit margin with all expenses considered, about 10 to 20%
Okay.
is
Nice.
healthy. Is
Okay.
healthy. I mean, more than that is great.
Yeah.
Less than that is not so great. So if you're under 10,
Hmm.
then that means that your expenses are disproportionate to what you've got coming in. Yeah. Payroll, rent, operating expenses, taxes, your insurance, all of that stuff factored in. You should have a healthy profit of 10 to 20%.
Right. So I know this is another thing that comes up frequently. What is cash flow and how is that different from revenue?
Revenue is what you earn on paper, and cash flow it's the movement of the money in and out of your account. So you can have really good revenue and you can still feel like you don't have money because you look in the bank account and the timing just makes it that there's times when maybe there's very little in there. So again, revenue is what your studio is earning. That's all the tuition that you're taking in, your comp fees, registration fees, merchandise sales, all that stuff. So revenue is going to answer the question, how much did I sell? And then revenue is not, though, um, it doesn't mean that the money has hit your bank account, if that makes sense. It
Yeah.
doesn't mean that you can safely spend
Right.
what you brought in because not all of that money belongs to you. Some of that money is liabilities, it's payroll taxes, it's payroll, it's utilities, insurance, all of that stuff. So that's your revenue. Your cash flow is what you can actually use. So hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah.
So the cash flow basically answers, can I pay my bills when they're due? What do I have in my
Right.
account that I can use right now to take care of the things that have to be taken care of? So I think sometimes the tension for studio owners is that tuition is usually monthly, but your payroll could be weekly or biweekly or bi-monthly, right? And then you have those months, recital month, or even like September, October, when enrollments are coming in pretty steadily. Those months are really meaty. And then you've got your, July and August, which maybe are not. Your expenses are there all the time, but sometimes your revenue comes in waves. So that's where things can get a little bit tricky. So
Yeah.
I have an example. So let's say that your studio bills, or you bill out, sorry, 40,000 in tuition in September,
Yeah.
but only 32 hit your bank after fees and what have you. And then you have your payroll and your rent and your expenses that are 35,000. So you're looking at your revenue and you're like, "Oh, my revenue looks great, but my cash flow, what I actually have once everything comes in and goes out doesn't feel so good." And
Yeah.
that's where, again, not to sound like a broken record, but this is where budgeting comes in because it's super important that you can look at your cash balance every week. And I know that's probably sounds weird because we're thinking in terms of monthly tuition, but you need to see that every week there's money in that account that you could use if you needed to, because not everything is going to go like we experienced in 2020, 2019.
Right.
Things are going to happen and you need to have a cushion.
Right. Yeah, the things that come to mind when you're talking about this are so many studios have auto pay tuition that runs on the first of the month,
Yep.
and their rent or maybe mortgage is also due on the first of the month. And if the first of the month falls on a holiday or a Friday, yes, it posted to the family's accounts that it's been paid, but it's not clearing the bank for 3 or 4
Right.
days.
Right. Yep.
Um, and likewise, when you're doing well, you run your tuition, you've gotten all this income in, but then you come to a month like May where there's three pay periods,
Right.
and you have to do paychecks 3 times that month instead of two. You can kind of get into that pinch point. So it's a
Right.
time to look at what's happening there in your account and having a buffer for
Absolutely.
yourself.
Yep, 100%. And also, you do have agency with some of these things, and it is okay to reach out to providers and work on, when certain things are going to come out and change it to make it work for when you have money coming in. You don't have to be subject to when they tell you. There's a lot of utilities and et cetera, that you can talk to them and say, is there any way that I can have this come out on this day? Or,
Mhm.
and same thing with payroll, set your payroll up in a way that works for you so that you don't end up in those, like you said, those pinches, those crunches where you look and, yep, for about a week, we're holding our breath. Nobody wants to do that.
I know the last thing we were going to talk about today was discounts,
Mm,
and discounts have so much more to do emotionally than financially,
true.
as we found. So tell us what we can talk about in terms of KPIs with discounts.
Yeah, I think it really comes down to a lack of systems. If you do have discounts, what did you create your discounts based on? Are they based on your numbers, or are they based on just, what you think emotionally, what you're trying to accomplish, how you're trying to cater to sibling discounts or, multi-class discounts, all of that stuff. Again, it just comes down to knowing your numbers, looking at what you need, and then
Yeah.
making sure that if you are going to offer a discount, that it is going to work for you. So one of the big ones is taking each class and finding out if each class is making enough money to cover the teacher for that class. And I think we talked about this the last time that we chatted, but your teacher is getting paid the same amount for every class. But
Yeah.
some of those kids in that class, because this is their, let's say this one is their third class, or you look at it like that, they're only paying half of what all some of the other kids are paying for that class.
Right.
All of those things matter. It is super important to look at each class and recognize if these discounts are hurting your bottom line by making it so that that class alone is not profitable.
People do borrow their discount structures either from the former owner or what somebody else in their city is doing.
Hmm.
Or what I see most commonly with my clients is that they feel bad for
Hmm.
the high level training kids, for
Hmm.
the competition kids, the kids in the intensive programs or pre professional who are taking 5, 6, 7, 10, 12 hours a week. They say, gosh, there's no way I can charge full rate because they wouldn't be able to afford it. And so it's coming from a place of fear on their part, making up a reason why you
Hmm.
can't charge a certain amount. And I'm not going to tell people what they should or shouldn't charge. I don't know your unique situation. I think we just have to be careful as business owners to not assume the affordability of our clients.
Right, right. And it's our job to think like a CEO. And I
Yeah.
know that that's challenging
Yeah.
because it kind of goes against everything that we think and feel. But feelings aside, it is important because, what good is your studio to all of these kids if your studio is not there anymore because you don't know how to manage things financially? I've had conversations with studio owners who it was so scary. I didn't want to raise my prices. I didn't want to remove the discount, but then they do it, or even setting up auto pay. That was, kind of this big scary thing for people
Oh,
at one point.
yeah.
Nobody's going to want to do this, and I feel bad. And then, a couple months in, nobody even is blinking an eye that and it's easy, and you've just saved yourself time, and all these amazing things happen. You need to do, and you stand on it confidently.
Yeah.
um it just People they just come along. They really do. If they are at your studio because they love what you bring,
Oh, yeah.
they trust you, they know that you have, the best intentions with their kids. I It's not as hard as you think it's going to be. And when you get over that feeling that maybe we're hurting someone's feelings somehow because we're charging what we're worth, we're paying our bills. Once you get over that, yeah, it's actually kind of easy to just operate in, that CEO mindset.
Right.
And it definitely makes survival, makes thriving so much easier when we can do that. But we got to put the emotions aside. That's the hardest part.
So, for people who are interested in learning more about digging into their numbers and maybe they just need a little bit of help,
Yeah.
how can they reach out to HarQuin Dance Bookkeeping?
www.dancebookkeeping.co. That's our website. If you there on that homepage, you can click on get an estimate. You can schedule a call with us and we can chat about your situation. If you feel like it's, somewhat unique, or you have questions about how we do things or what we offer, we can schedule a call, or you can fill out an estimate form. Just any questions that you have, we're happy to answer them. We have loads of resources that we send out all the time. So even if you just want to reach out so you can get on our newsletter, we send out monthly newsletters and downloads and guides. Um, it's really important to us that we're supporting dance studio owners and educating them, whether they're a client or not. So we love to give out free stuff.
So, I will put that link in the show notes for today. And I
Great.
just want to say thank you so much for
You're
coming
welcome.
on, sharing this information and breaking it down in practical language that um, we don't have to feel intimidated by these numbers and these, financial terms that maybe we've heard but haven't really fully understood. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah, you're so welcome. It's always a pleasure.
All right. Until next time, everyone, we will see you later.